Hi, guys. Welcome back to the Untitled Podcast. If you're new here or returning, thank you for tuning in to listen to me yap today. And today we are going to get into one of my favorite segments on this podcast, aka Cinematic Crumbs. Now, just so we can get the warnings out of the way, for this episode of Cinematic Crumbs, we are going to be talking about a movie that depicts self harm, bullying, and also the ending of one's livelihood. So if you are, sensitive or a little tender towards those subjects and it's a little too close to home, please take care of yourself and listen to another pod or just take the time and take care of yourself. And I'll see you in the next one. And with that being said, let's get into today's movie. Today's movie I was actually meaning to watch for a very long time, and it sat in my watch list collecting dust for a very long time until now that I'm on spring break, I decided to watch it. And that movie is Close, um, which came out in 2022. And also, as a disclaimer, from here on out, I'll be reading the Google overview just because I feel like my previous overviews haven't been doing the movies a lot of justice in terms of wording and also conciseness of information without essentially spoiling the whole plot to you, hence why I make the pod. But from here on out, I'll be reading from the Google overview. And on Google, Close is said to be the 13-year-old boys, Leo and Remy, have a close friendship at school and in the flower fields where they and their parents pick the harvest for home. When schoolmates shoot a wedge into the relationship, the consequences are fatal. Now, that was a very, very concise, very short, overview of what the movie is. And you can already kind of see where we're going in terms of this. Babe, we're talking about Boyhood. And I'm not sure about y'all, but I have been loving, and I mean loving, the discussions that are being had and the different types of films that are being created that are surrounding Boyhood, because anytime that I have tried to talk or really understand the instances of what boys go through when they're going through like their developmental stages and whatnot, it's always been very vague. And so I'm loving that we're getting in a media format what these different types of versions of Boyhood looks like. I know that after, I think quite literally today, I'll be watching the movie City of God. And I know that one kind of ties heavily into that a little bit from what I know, since it has the main, I guess, protagonist as a male character. And we see how him growing up in that environment, intertwines with his boyhood. But like these newer films from these directors, yes, give me more. I would like to see more. As much as I love girlhood movies, I would also like to see the opposite of the other spectrum. And Close is one of those examples. And another one, if you like Close, I would also highly recommend watching Moonlight. Just saying. Now that we have pretty much went over that, right? A little rambling. Let's get into our characters. Now, just for the conciseness of this and the discussion revolving around how the movie was actually constructed, things that stood out to me, the messages that I think are correlated to them, and of course, what this overarching message of this film is. Just for the conciseness of this, we'll be focusing on only two characters, and I'll, of course, say other characters as well in relation to them, but they won't be given actual names like they are in the movie, if that makes sense. So, like I had mentioned in the overview, our two characters are Leo and Remy. Leo and Remy, from when you even start out in the beginning of the film, you can tell that these boys are incredibly tight knit. Tight knit in the sense of they were probably born in the same like hospital and automatically became friends because their mom became friends. Like it's very reminiscent of that childhood friend that you really never went away from or tore away from, and you guys were essentially in sync. Like that is the sort of relationship in which they hold. And we see this through not only the way they interact with each other, but just the people around them know this as well. Like, for example, Leo Leo's mother doesn't even expect him to sometimes come home because he is oftentimes having like a sleepover at Remy's house. And Remy's parents, both his mom and his dad, both kind of treat him as if he's their own son. And they very much welcome him into the house, and they allow them to play and have time together and just be boys, essentially. And when I mean just be boys, I mean literally just to be children and to enjoy their youth. Like, that's the type of dynamic we're getting off straight off the bat. And I hate to say it, but it's not going to last long. But before we even get to there, right, let's look at the actual scenery and environment that's around. I already knew as soon as I saw it, Remy's bedroom is incredibly red. It's this very nice shade of red, but also kind of blaring. You can definitely see that it like pops out, it stands out to you. There's many instances of coloring in this film, and specifically red, which is, from what I understand it to be, automatically associated with Remy. So keep that in mind. And then also on top of that, let's talk about the flower fields. The flower fields, of course, are a part of Leo's parents' business and how they pretty much get income, and it's essentially a part of their jobs. They manage those flower fields. And you see that in the beginning of the film. The flower fields are very much a mix of like, you know, your whites, your yellows, your pinks, your reds. Like, it's a very beautiful field just made with a lot of flowers, and the boys will oftentimes run through them, and they'll also bicycle together and like have this sort of competitive, like, let's see who can race who, um like montage at times. And you can see later on that distance is made not only through the symbolic imagery of the flower fields, but also as well the distance between their bicycles and the way in which they kind of distance themselves from each other. But yeah, those three things, the color red, that specific shade of red with Remy's bedroom, the flower fields, and the bikes, three main, like, very symbolic things that are going to come up later on. And so before we get there, right, the change in which happens from the summer to the fall is, of course, when you're 13 years old, babe, get back in school. You got to go back to school. And so I believe that Leo was the new, I think they were pretty new, both of them, to this school, because it seemed like they hadn't really established any real other like solid friendships. I believe both of them were new to the school. So they're pretty much in middle school at this point. And they go back, and they're, of course, acting normally as they would if they were, you know, together during the summer. And this is where the conflict comes in, because you see that Leo is very uncomfortable with the questions from not only the girls, but also very snide comments that are coming from boys. But the first thing that was shown on screen was a girl asking if Leo and Remy were together. And what I mean together, I mean literally what you think. Were they boyfriends? Like, were they gay? Were they together as a couple? Leo, of course, being a 13-year-old boy who probably hasn't even thought about being in a relationship and is still very much, you know, enjoying his youth, because before we even get to the school montage, you see these two boys enjoying things like imaginary play with like acting like they're like two comrades and soldiers and friends in war, and playing with their surroundings and running through fields and, you know, competitively racing on their bicycles and seeing each other in their element. Like, for example, Remy, he plays the flute. Literally, Leo will just be there as, you know, comfort. Not only comfort, but as company. You see those types of very childlike, youthful things happening. But as soon as they get in school, that's when a lot of the more, I guess you could call them adult themes, start to bleed their way into their world. Their youth is now being essentially subjected to more bigger discussions that they haven't been even thinking about in the first place. You see the very much uncomfortability, the uncomforting like nature of that question to Leo. And you definitely see that this is going to be the first domino that trickles them all down. And I think it's very interesting to see the difference of reactions between Leo and Remy. When Leo, because they're both being asked this, because they're both at the lunch table together and they're surrounded by these group of girls. And you see Leo actively get tightened up, like he straightens up his back, he gets defensive, he says, like, no, we're not a couple. He actively seems like he's trying to prove himself to these girls that, yeah, like, yeah, no, we're just close, we're just friends. Like, we don't kiss, we don't hold hands, we don't, like, do all of these romantic partner things with each other. So, how could you believe that we are more than friends? Like, we're just best friends. And he even brings up the point of that girls do these things with each other, that you guys will, lay on each other or confide in each other or be close to one another, but you guys won't, do the kissing or hugging like partners do. We're the same. Like, there's nothing really that crazy about it. He's essentially bringing up the fact of how, well, unintentionally bringing up the fact of how there's a difference of how, socially speaking, it is seen to be very tight knit with girls versus being tight knit as guys. And he's just now experiencing his first doses of that through these girls' expectations of them by imagining that because that they're close to one another, that the only way they could be close to one another is through being romantically involved. And back to Remy, who's listening to all of this, he stays very quiet. Remy, out of the two, right? Remy is very like happy, very calm. He's a very bright boy. He seems like so kind, so sweet. And same thing for Leo, but you see this change in Leo as time goes on and as he tries to prove himself to his peers around him. But Remy, in this current moment, he's just like kind of taken aback by the question, but he's not necessarily as defensive as Remy. He agrees, with Leo, my bad, with Leo. He agrees with Leo that they aren't a thing, but he's ultimately just very quiet about it. And he doesn't seem to think much of it, as it seems to me. And so that is the first domino that happens to trickle everything downhill from there. You see, as time progresses, that Leo actively tries to distance himself physically from Remy, whether that is through, hanging out with different boys, hanging out with different people, not waiting for him to go back home with, not staying at his house. He's actively pushing him away in order to get away from essentially these gay allegations, which I would like to bring up right now, right? Since we're having a discussion about this film, and it's not going to be very detail oriented or XYZ. This is just an overview, as we all know. But I would like to bring up the fact that I don't think that the main message of this film is to focus on their sexuality. I think this is truly a coming of age story where you get all of the sociological factors and influences that led to the end of what is the movie, right? And I think that Leo trying to essentially distance himself from him in this way, I feel like a lot of people have probably done that a lot, especially if they have been, put up against the wall of something they haven't even, one, probably thought of, two, or they just know that they are, for example, straight, and they just distance themselves. So you literally see this physical distance, and Remy doesn't understand. Because I will say that, again, these are 13-year-old boys. They're not really that communicative. They're not really that communicative, right? They're not really talking to each other about feelings that much. Not inherently at least. They just kind of understand each other. And with that being said, Leo starts to essentially, like I said, distance himself. Remy understands this as something is wrong, but Leo refuses to actually talk to him and to try and make him known of why he's doing it. He just sort of pushes him away, and Remy is very, very, I will say, heartbroken. Not romantically, like I'm saying, but just heartbroken at the fact of his friend is trying to get away from him. He doesn't really understand why, but he sees it in, you know, recent time, in present time. And so, like I said, Leo keeps doing this. He eventually joins the crowd of boys that are that you can see are very much different from what he is as a character and what he is with Remy and what both of them are at their basis, because both of these boys, I would say, are very playful, they're fun to have around, they're kind, they're sweet. They're they're like not the type of boys that are being depicted with this group. This group of boys are very much like picking on one another. They're horse playing around. They're being rougher with one another. And this is where Leo starts to pick up his first doses of what he tries to understand as masculinity and how he should show that, because he realizes that socially these boys are a lot more acceptable versus the relationship that he has with Remy, which is a lot softer and a lot more emotionally charged, versus these other boys. They find community and relationships with other guys through being very distant, through not touching, through just horse playing around and being competitive with one another. It's like the basis of what, masculinity is in a boy's eyes. He starts to see that and he starts to implement himself in that and implement himself in that group, even though he necessarily has never even been like that from the beginning. He was never horse playing around. He was never rough. He was never making awful or snide comments or picking on one another. Like, he was never that boy. But he's soon trying to integrate himself into that sort of quote unquote, I guess you could say, lifestyle. And you can see this by him joining the hockey team. Like, he's actively trying to create physical flags of, physical flags and imagery for the public to see that he is masculine, that he is normal, that he isn't, gay or XYZ. And again, gay isn't a bad thing, right? We all know this. At least you should know this at this point. Gay isn't a bad thing. But I think of more of he just wants to be accepted and he doesn't want to be seen as an outcast. And so he joins the hockey team. He batters himself up. I don't think he even really likes it because he finds that the physical exertion and the competitiveness of it and the constant yelling and being yelled at and all these things in which he's not used to are being thrown at him, but he's trying to toughen himself up to essentially tighten up in order for him to fit into that role. Meanwhile, Remy, he doesn't make the same strides as Leo does to try and fit in. He stays towards the group of girls and boys that are true to themselves, that don't try and, fit into those rigid roles. He stays with a group that he feels comfortable with and that accepts him for who he is. He's a boy that likes music. He's a boy that likes to play around. He's a boy that's sweet and kind and he likes to talk. That is who Remy is. And Remy doesn't try and make that same shift, hard left turn like Leo does. And so it creates this very big wedge in their relationship, so much so that it starts to see the cracks in it. And even when they are together, the very brief times before they fully separate, you see that the bicycle montage, right? Previously in the film, you see that they're pretty in sync. They're together. They never really go farther than the other, not far enough to where you can't see the other person or leave the other person behind. They always kind of bicycle together, even if they're competitively going at it. But at this point, after Leo had tried to horseplay around with him, but really it just turned out to be an act of aggression that Remy didn't really like or was used to. And when the bicycle scene comes up, you see this big distance between the two. And that obviously signifies to the audience that this shift and this rift has started to create a massive amount of damage to their relationship. And again, like I had mentioned, they're not speaking to one another. They're not communicating with one another. They've always just kind of got one another. And right now we're having a huge communication issue and nobody knows what's going on, including the parents especially. But everybody knows that there's a rift, but we just don't know what. And so again, the bicycle, you see Remy start to like go ahead, Leo starts to go ahead, and there's distance made between the two. And after that, again, I'm going off of memory with this, so be patient with me, please. But after that, you start to see, unfortunately, the sadness of Remy and how much that relationship meant to him. Because, mind you, they came into this middle school together. They've been friends with each other for years. This was his right-wing man. This was the guy he's always found comfort with, who understood who he was and understood also his intimacy and closeness that he had to him and never had an issue with it. And now that he's gone, that's a pretty big chunk of his life that is being put on what seems to be a permanent hold. And so you start to see the light from Remy dim in such a way that it gives depression, babe. It gives depression. He's sad, he's hurt, he's torn up. He starts crying at the dinner table with his family and Leo there because of the fact of things are changing and he doesn't necessarily understand why they're changing. And Leo's not talking to him, but he's putting this distance from him. And he allows himself to feel these emotions, but they're very intense, especially, again, these may be boys, but I would like to keep prefacing throughout this video, boy or girl, these are 13-year-old kids. They haven't even got their license, babe. They're 13 years old. They're freshly out of, the 12-year-old realm. Like, they're just now getting in their teens. Like, they're technically in their preteens right now. And he's feeling all these intense emotions, and he's breaking down, and he even starts a fight with Leo because of the fact that he just doesn't understand what's going on, but he just wants his best friend back. And Leo subsequently is also hurt by this in a way, but he still sticks to his group of friends and his dynamics in which he has and has curated for the public to see, while essentially, again, pushing Remy away. And Remy starts sinking deeper and deeper into this hole of just despair. And it gets to a point where in the fields, you see that the color from the flowers are draining. They're starting to die. And eventually, at one point, again, like I had said, red. At one point, the red flowers in the fields are chippered down, like they're cut down. You see that the flowers are cut down, signifying essentially the destruction of not only the boys' relationships, but also on top of that, Remy himself. When Leo is at a school field trip that Remy was also supposed to be on, during that time where he was having fun and XYZ, by the time he comes back from that school trip, Everybody realizes that something is wrong when they see their parents outside of the bus waiting for them, and they were told to come into the auditorium for a talk. You can already see where this is going. Again, I'll put it in here, trigger warning. Not Remy, but Leo is then told by his mother, because he already knows that something's wrong before he can even get off the bus. And I think in this moment, he stays on the bus to get away from the fact that he knows that something is wrong with Remy, and that he doesn't want to hear what it is, not in front of everybody, not in that auditorium. And so I think he stays in this bus, and his mom tries to retrieve him. And that's when he unfortunately gets the news from his mom, who is also breaking down, because again, these families were incredibly tight-knit, from his mom that Remy had took his own life. And Leo goes through what I can imagine is a whirlwind of emotions. And I'm sure at the base of it, it's absolute distraught. And he runs out of the bus, and he just runs and runs and runs. And he gets on his bicycle, and his mom is like tailing him behind with the car. And he gets to Remy's house only to see that the bathroom door, which was an issue beforehand, because when Remy was breaking down for the first time in the bathroom after being roughened up by Leo, his mom pretty much had told him, like, hey, I need you to unlock this door. I don't have to come in, just keep the door unlocked. And you see that same bathroom door was busted in because he had locked it and assumingly had, hurt himself in there and eventually ended his life in there. And you just see the mangled up door. It's just heartbreaking. It's so heartbreaking. And you're overcome with these very, very distraught and overwhelming amount of guilt as well that you can imagine Leo is going through, because he understands why he did it. He knows why he did it. And I think a part of Leo definitely took responsibility for that. But before we even get there, let's talk about Leo's, grieving process of Remy. Because Remy, like we had discussed, was obviously falling deeper and deeper into despair. There was no communication with his parents or anybody else. So, of course, his parents saw the shift in his behavior, but didn't think it was hugely going to bubble over to this point of ending his own life. And they also couldn't get him to speak, which I'm sure was a very, very hard thing to deal with as a parent. When you try, but your kid just can't speak to you in that way. And so he just fell deeper and deeper into despair. Now we get Leo's point of view of everything. Well, the whole movie is from his point of view, but we get his, journey of how he deals with grief, with the new tool set of how to show his manliness or his boyhood at this point. Because previously, Remy and Leo both were very open to emotional expression before it had been tainted by the, strict regulations of others' viewing, right? Which is, against what they had been taught by their parents. But we see this with Leo because he doesn't cry. He doesn't cry. He's just more of on autopilot, I would for sure say. He's on autopilot. He understands that his friend is gone. And I think he is trying to hold in all of these very hard and very intense emotions of despair and guilt and sadness and probably curiosity as well. And he's essentially holding this in and bottling it up And he continues his routine of like going to hockey, going to school, hanging out with his friends. Now they're having sit down conversations at school for the kids, almost sort of like a therapy of like, how did you guys feel about Remy? Let's go around like in a circle and talk about Remy, just to get the kids sort of regulated to talking about their emotions and not having it bottled up. But you see everybody else speak, people that aren't even necessarily that close with Remy, but you don't see Leo speak, not once, in these sort of settings. And again, he's holding on to these emotions with a tight grip until it all starts to burst out. And the way that it bursts out is when one of the kids, who I think was Remy's bully, low key at one point, was, or at least made fun of him at one point, talked about how Remy was very bright, how he was a very musical guy, and how he was good. He was a good boy. Like, he was a good guy. Leo, like, obviously interrupts him, and he's like, how do you know that he was happy? And he gets this sort of defensiveness and possessiveness over the memory of Remy because of the fact of nobody was really ever that close to him like he was. But you still have this person in front of you claiming to know him and to say these things about him. And he's not even here to talk about it or to tell you how he feels. But obviously, he wasn't that happy if he took his own life. And so you get this scene with Leo and him arguing back and forth. And he gets defensive and he gets angry at this fact. And he storms out of there. And he sees how little by little Remy is being removed from his life. Not only his physical body, but also his belongings. From like his school locker, hearing his, like, he used to go to his recitals, his musical recitals, because like I said, he's a music guy. He plays, I think, the flute or some, instrument close to a flute. Don't quote me. But he plays that instrument, and he used to go to his recitals and cheer for him in the crowd. Then there was a time in which he didn't go because, again, he was trying to implement himself into this new form of wave of like masculinity. And then he now is trying to, I think he's going through that sort of grieving period where you start to take yourself through where the person who's passed would have been. So he starts to go to his recital even though he's not there. He sees his mom removing his stuff from his locker. He can't exactly at this point face his mom because the guilt is killing him. Like, the guilt is eating at him. He feels like he's done a crime. Like he's a criminal. That's what I get from how he explores and goes through his grief. He feels as responsible for his death as anybody else who was directly doing it or something like that would. Like, he feels that he was the cause and this was the effect. And so throughout the time, for the longest time, he can't face his mom, even though him and his mom and Remy's mom were very close. He just couldn't bring himself yet to do it. But you see that he's starting to implement himself in places where Remy would have been and trying to get through the process of understanding and accepting, I would say, that his friend is gone. And there comes a point where his brother tries to help him in this time. And I think it's very, very, what's it called? I would say this is very important as well in terms of the discussions of Boyhood because of the fact of you see that his brother is making an active attempt of comforting him in a place of vulnerability, and he sort of soothes him and tells him that it's okay to cry, that it's okay to do these things, it's okay to grieve and to feel this way. And you see that through the grief period as well. Leo starts like wetting the bed. Obviously, the guilt is tearing him up real bad. He's wetting the bed. He needs somebody there with him, and he starts to sleep in his brother's bed for that comfort, for that intimacy, for that not closure, but for that closeness to a person. Because again, previously he used to have that with Remy. Him and Remy used to share a bed. And again, I like to preference. This isn't about sexuality. Sexuality can be a part of the discussion, but this isn't about sexuality. This was just about the intimacy. And when I mean intimacy, I don't mean like sexual intimacy. I mean intimacy as in closeness, as in comfort, as in friendship, as in having somebody that you know you can trust near. That's what I mean by intimacy. And that was one of the things in which they would do is share the bed and have those times in which they were just physically close. And now he is seeking that sort of same thing with his brother, now that he's going through this grieving period, now that Remy is, unfortunately gone. And then it comes to a boiling point of when he breaks his arm by accident during hockey because he falls so many times because he's not able to keep his, concentration that well. Because, he's going through a lot. He's still keeping up his normal routine, but he's also going through this huge amount of grief. And he hasn't even cried. Again, he has not cried at all during this time. He breaks his arm. And I think this is a very important scene. When he's at the doctor's office and he's getting it like bandaged up, he starts to break down and sob during that moment. And I think not only because it was a boiling point of all of his emotions that he just needs to let it out, but I think that during that time, he thought it would be the most safe to cry during that time because of the fact of he was injured. And so when you're injured and you obviously have something broken, of course it hurts, of course there's pain. And I think that just being seen visually, it would have made sense that he would start crying and that it would be a safe place and space to cry at because, he's at the doctor's office getting his arm bandaged. I think that was incredibly important because even you see the doctor and his father try and comfort him like, yeah, a broken arm hurts, when really he's grieving and actively getting his emotions out about his friend that has passed. And I think that's incredibly sad, not only because he thought the only way that he could safely cry was when he was physically broken. But not only that, but the fact of his parents really didn't know how to help him through that time, even though they were of support to him to give him space to feel out what he needs to. Like, it was just devastating to see. And he breaks down, he starts crying. You feel this sort of release come from the audience perspective. I felt relief that he was finally crying because I was like, my Lord, when will this boy cry? Because even at his funeral, he didn't cry. He just looked at Remy's mom, who was staring ahead. But I always feel like when he makes eye contact with Remy's mom, that he always felt, of course, this overwhelming amount of guilt, but also I think that she definitely knew that he was staring. Because we then get this sort of conglomeration of times where they start to meet, Remy's mom and Leo. And I think another good scene that I should point out is the dinner scene between Leo's family and Remy's family, so just his mom and his dad. And as Leo's older brother, was talking about him getting his license soon and what he'll do after he gets out of high school, Remy's dad starts to break down in front of the family, and he doesn't try and move away either. He just sits there and cries. And I think that it was powerful because of the fact of he doesn't try and shy away from the fact that he was crying. In fact, he invites those emotions to come to him and he lets them run their course, even if he's in front of other people, which I think he also taught to Remy. And that was shown and seen through how Remy acted throughout the time in which he was alive. And then you see Remy's mom leave the dinner table and just kind of go outside and think and wait, I guess. And she waits and she waits and she waits without fully pushing. She does ask him, like, what happened between you two when Leo decides to actually come and visit her and to see Remy's room. She just wants to ask Leo, like, hey, what happened to y'all? What was that? Can you just give me that sort of closure to know, like, why my boy was so sad? And Leo, again, he's not ready to tell, so he kind of runs off. But there is a time where he is ready, and Leo goes to her job, like takes the bus to her job. And he gets in her car, and they come to a stop when they're going back, right? And Leo lets her know why Remy was so sad, which was he claims that it was his fault and that he's responsible for his death because he pushed him away. Remy didn't have him during his last moments because he had pushed him away, and he starts breaking down. His mom, Remy's mom starts to absolutely just, it feels like relief, but it also feels like devastation that the friend in which you had put hope into to take care of your child didn't keep up that end of the bargain, not fully. And that ultimately did indeed lead to the death of your child. She felt this anger that soon came, shooting up from her devastation and release and relief that she was feeling. Her anger came out a little bit and she told Leo to get out. And by the time that they both get to the woods, because of course she said that in a moment of anger and Leo takes off into the woods. But I believe that it was just so she wouldn't say anything incredibly heinous or harsh to the boy. I think she was protecting him in that way because, again, I couldn't imagine being a parent in her shoes and getting essentially a confession from the friends saying that, yes, in due part, I was a part of the reason why your boy isn't here. Like, I couldn't imagine being in her footsteps, but not in her footsteps, but in her shoes. But she runs after him. They find each other in the woods, or rather, she finds him in the woods, and he's holding up a stick. And I think this was one of the times where I was kind of confused because I was like, wait a minute, why is he holding up the stick? And I think, again, it shows the sort of, again, what he's learned through these more, I would say, toxic versions of masculinity, of trying to defend yourself even when you're weak, or trying to put up a shield or some sort of distance between people when you're feeling vulnerable. And I feel like the stick is very representative of that because she can't get close without, hitting the stick first. And she ultimately kind of like calms him down, pries him down, and they have this very heartwarming hug in the woods. And she doesn't blame him for the death, which I would like to put in my own 2 cups of tea into this segment, right? That I believe that, was it a great thing that Leo decided to push his friend away? No. But at the same time, these are 2 13-year-olds who don't communicate. They just always guying each other. I don't put the blame on Leo for the death of Remy, nor do I put the death of Remy on Remy. Like, I don't believe it was anybody's fault in this way. I believe that, if anything, the bigger issue was the socialization of it all, the need for being seen as manly or being seen as a normal boy. I think that was really what is, or yeah, what is the killer, essentially. I think the killer of Remy was essentially boyhood, manhood. That was the killer of it. Toxic masculinity. It was the killer of Remy. Because had that not been questioned by, first off, the girls, and then secondly, the boys around them environmentally, had that not been so ingrained in those younger people, in their peers' minds, that they would have to be, gay or have to be together, or this wasn't normal for them to do so, had that not been ingrained in them, and they would have just acted as if they were just two normal best friends, none of this would have happened. Leo wouldn't have pushed him away. Leo would have stayed by his side. Remy wouldn't have been, drowned in despair. He would have still been here. If anything, the culprit is toxic masculinity. And I believe that Remy's mom understood that as well. And they're able to reconcile with each other about the fact of everything. And their relationship is made whole and is made a lot better. Leo, you see that the turning point of his character, or one of the turning points of his character, is that he starts to heal by the time we're getting to the end. He starts to heal himself through, not only surrounding himself with the boy friends that he had made through, trying to be masculine. He's still in hockey. He's still, communicating with Remy's mom. And eventually, you start to see that by the end, he's now not fully healed, of course, but more of just lighter in that way. He feels a lot more at peace with how everything's went about. And at peace is a very large word, but I'm using it very lightly. A little bit of peace that he's holding on to. And he goes to see Remy's house one last time, and it's empty. The parents moved for obvious reasons. And he goes through the fields as he's going back. And you see that the fields are now fully bloomed. They're no longer dead. They're no longer chopped down. The red roses or flowers, they're, not on the ground battered down as a, signifier that Remy was gone. But now you have this new sort of blooming happening with Remy, not Remy, with Remy's memory still being with Leo, but Leo also understanding this new lesson and this new healing of what happened as events had went and gone on, if that makes sense. You get this new conclusion that Leo is finding, again, lightly, some sorts of peace, and that I'm sure Remy will always be a part of him in some way. And he's understanding some more nuances of what boyhood, soon leading into manhood, will be, and what masculinity is. And he's growing into that version of himself with balancing the two. And that's where the movie ends. You see that instead of him and Remy, like in the beginning of the film, they used to run through the fields together and have a great time, and it was bloomed as well. You see at the end of the film that Leo, of course, is the only one there running through the field, and he stops and he looks back, and that's the end of the film. Come on, guys, come on. Freaking cinema. Freaking cinema. I repeat, cinema, cinema, cinema. I did not expect this much from this film. I thought it was going to be boring, but really it was so tender, but it was also so heart-wrenching to see. because I'm sure everybody to some extent has had a falling out with a friend, but to have not only that, but to also have lost them in that way because of something so I'm gonna say it's stupid, and I don't mean to say that Leo is stupid for pursuing it or Remy is stupid for saying it as that. I'm saying it's so stupid that something like masculinity could matter so much to people around us, our peers, the people around us in our environment, that it led to the ultimate conclusion of the end of a friend. Like, that is so awful. That is so awful. It's so awful. And I would like to give out outs to the actors who play Leo and Remy. Because my lord, they acted their butts off. It was a great, 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 great depiction of young actors being able to, act. Um, I think this is I don't know what type of film, like the place in which this film comes from, but whatever company this came from, 8. Absolutely 8. Color grading was beautiful. It was like this sort of bright, but not like incredibly harsh to the eyes, like scenic sort of color grading. Like, it was beautifully color graded. We got beautiful shots. The use of certain colors and symbolic imagery in this film was fantastic. Like I had said, the color red, the flower fields, and even them riding bicycles and the distance between them and riding bicycles. Like, come on, guys. It was so good. It was so good. And also just seeing the struggle, but also the healing process of Leo when he is going through the waves of essentially grief, like the 7 stages of grief, and eventually getting to that more nuanced but sort of peaceful place of understanding everything by the end. Like, come on. Come on. This was such a good film, and I absolutely love it. I need it on DVD ASAP. I need it on DVD ASAP. It is such a good commentary on how socialization happens, how masculinity is essentially performed, and how it's put onto boys who don't fit into the more rigid roles of masculinity, of being very strong, of being violent, of being, emotionally stunted at its basis, and not showing any more of those quote unquote feminized, not feminized, but more feminine like components, which would be to be emotional, to be sensitive, to be caring, to be kind, all those things. This was a great commentary to have it on, because you see that boy who falls into some of those quote unquote feminine characteristics essentially have to morph and chip away at himself in order to meet that quota, in order to be accepted, in order to be seen as quote unquote a normal boy. And I think as well, there was good but very subtle tie-in of sexuality and how these stereotypes of sexuality and intimacy are often correlated as well, especially for boys. If you have 2 boys standing too close to one another, if you have 2 boys communicating a lot with one another, if you see them oftentimes around with one another, they don't even have to do anything sexual. It's just the mere closeness of them and the more intimate energy that they give to one another that sort of emulates how girl friendships are often seen. Those types of things are often correlated with being gay, with being some sort of couple, with being romantic. And again, like I said, I don't think the main, huge message here is to talk about, oh, these 2 boys were oppressed, or they definitely had a thing for one another, or XYZ. I don't think that sexuality was the main purpose, but it was a good tie-in because it hits on the fact of how we understand intimacy, especially with intimacy of boys and how they interact with one another, is automatically correlated to romance when that isn't the case. I would dare say most of the time that isn't the case. Because, like Leo had brought up, do they kiss? Do they hold hands? Do they do romantic things? Do they go on dates? They do none of those things. These are just the things in which they do with each other as best friends. Much like I was saying, how girls do it. They are close to one another. We talk with one another. We are usually close physically with one another, but we don't do those other things that are very romantic. We just have that sort of tight knit, bonded intimacy with one another as friends, as platonic friends, that is socially acceptable in comparison to two boys doing it. And I think that was a great social commentary to bring up, because I think personally, I believe that boys should be able to do that. If girls are able to do it, why can't boys do it? Y'all will literally scream, he's gay! And for what? And for what? And even then, I like to bring up the point, even if they are gay, even if they are, listen to me now, even if they are gay, what business do you have being in theirs? Like, what business do you have being in their Kool-Aid that much that you have to be like, oh, are you guys a couple? Like, that literally has nothing to do with you. Why are you in their Kool-Aid? Even if they are best friends who are, trying to understand the dynamics and feelings in which they hold for one another later on down in life, or even now. And if they're, trying to understand their sexuality and how that relates to one another and how that intertwines with one another, how does that have to do with anything with you as an outsider? You have nothing to do with their relationship. What they have is what they have. And again, I don't think those intimate things that they were doing, like sharing the bed or, being physically close to one another while walking or laying on one another, I don't think those things are inherently romantic. I don't. I think that when you've met a person in which you feel incredibly close to and you both see each other as what I call platonic soulmates, like you just get one another to such a degree that it feels like this is your person and you guys are very close, but you guys don't want to do anything like romantic with one another, like sexual with one another. It's just like that relationship means so much to you because this is like your greatest friend. This is your greatest moment and this is your greatest friend you will have. That right there, I don't think that's romantic. I think that's incredibly platonic, and I think it's something that we as a society, and I mean not only in the Western sphere, I mean literally everywhere, I fear that we have this huge microscope on romance and romanticism that we often romanticize things that aren't romantic, that aren't, inherently sexual or romantic in nature. And we just kind of shove it all into one box of it being romantic. And you kind of rob yourself of having any other sort of platonic intimacy by doing so. Like that right there. It's so sick. It's so sick. It's incredibly sick. But that's essentially what Close was. Close 2022. If you haven't watched it, go ahead and watch it. I would highly recommend it. It's getting a 9 out of 10 for me. It's getting a 9 out of 10 for me, for sure. It was a beautiful film, beautifully made, great actresses and actors, beautiful storyline. And I love the symbolism. I love a good symbolism. And it wasn't so hard that you had to think about it in and out. Like, it was great. Highly recommend. So yeah, if you enjoyed this Cinematic Crumbs, please give it a like or a comment on YouTube or not. You have free will. If you're listening to this on a streaming service of some sort, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I hope to see you again soon. And with that being said, let's end off this Cinematic Crumbs with a good little note. Take care of yourself today. Make sure to eat, make sure to drink some water. And yeah, I'm logging off. Bye.